Hi, I'm Tiffany. For 15 years, I've been living with a lot of questions and a strange burden on my soul. All the people around me say that I do not look like my parents or grandparents, but like our neighbor, Uncle Matthew. To be honest, I'm not very happy to hear this. I didn't care before, and I didn't even understand these words. But now that I'm old enough, the thought of it makes me sick. In general, my parents are very good people. We have 4 children in the family, and I am the oldest. Mom and Dad always wanted more children because they were the only ones in their families. My mother often said that it was very sad to have no one to play with, and in adult life, after being left without parents, you feel lonely. I wasn't exactly familiar with that feeling. My parents got married early and gave birth every 2 years. They are sure that this way, the children will remain connected and they will be interested in playing and communicating with each other because of the small age difference. They were right. We are really close to each other, but I still sometimes feel out of my depth. I'll explain why. If you take our family photo, where we stand all together, the youngest brother looks like a grandfather, a sister like a grandmother, an older brother looks like a mother, and logically, I should have looked like my father, but for some reason, everyone says that I look like our neighbor, Uncle Matthew. Oh, that's what everyone in the neighborhood said. Everyone who knew my neighbor and my father. At first, I didn't care, because I was too young. And then, these conversations were embarrassing. Once, I even couldn't stand it and directly asked my parents why people say that. But my mom didn't say anything and lowered her eyes. And my dad was angry and also didn't explain anything. He left the room stupidly. This made me think that my neighbor Matthew was my real father. Uncle Matthew himself was a good neighbor. He always treated us with apples and raspberries from his own garden and gave us toys for the new year. However, my parents forbade us to take them. Uncle Matthew lived not far from us. I didn't know why he was so nice to us, especially to me. And my parents strictly forbade us from communicating with him. You know, it was just another confirmation that my theory was correct. Perhaps, once upon a time, he met with my mother. Maybe they were even in love. But for some reason, they broke up, and then Mom met Dad. My mother decided to marry him, but did not know that she was already pregnant with me. And when she gave birth, my father guessed everything, but decided to forgive her. Well, Uncle Matthew, who was madly in love with my mother, found out that she had given birth to a daughter, that is, me, and when I began to grow up, he recognized me as himself and bought a house closer to watch his failed family. That's the theory I had. I didn't share it with anyone, but I really wanted to get to the truth. And I had a plan. Every year, my parents and I went away for a few days to visit my mother's friend at the dacha. It was our little vacation. I came up with a plan in advance and told my parents that I wanted to stay at home, study English, and improve my subject before school. They agreed. When the day of departure came, I saw the household off and went into the house. The first thing I did was go through all the documents. My birth certificate, my parents' marriage certificate, even the documents of my younger siblings, just in case. Everything was clean, nothing suspicious. I carefully put everything in one folder, as it was, and wanted to put it in place, and suddenly, a photo fell out of the folder. It was black and white and battered, and the image was blurry, but still visible. And then I just fucked up. What? Are my parents and Uncle Matthew in the photo? Threesome in a cafe? How so? Oh no, were they really best friends? Of course. It all fits together now. At this point, I was so nervous that I even got a headache. I couldn't believe my eyes. How did it happen? What really happened? It was like being hit on the head with a hammer. In some ways, I was disappointed in my uncle's relationship to my parents, and I also felt sorry for my father. How could he forgive my mother? After all, she had been carrying someone else's child under her heart for 9 months. How did it feel? No, wait, and then raise a child that isn't your own. And you know, my father never hurt me in anything. I, as the eldest child, was first of all the children, and my father spent a lot of time with me. Even when the other children arrived, my connection to him remained special. Now I loved and respected my father twice as much, and I suddenly felt so hurt for him. Just imagine how it hurts and hurts him every time he hears that I am not his own daughter. This is terrible. Also, this damn neighbor moved in next to me and made my eyes bleed. I decided to take matters into my own hands and went to Uncle Matthew's house that evening. I knocked loudly on the door, and when he opened it, I didn't even say hello and went inside. He was very surprised at my arrival and impudence, but did not drive me away. To be honest, I was so excited that I couldn't start talking. After all, my own father was standing in front of me. I hated him for some reason. "Is everything all right, honey?" he asked, and tears rolled out of my eyes. These incomprehensible feelings, uncertainty, anger, pain, all this neighborhood gossip that my family is tired of. All because of him. Don't call me that. He was surprised. "Is everything all right?" he asked after a moment, and I stood like a statue, silent and crying. Then I threw the photo at him. "How did your conscience allow you to live with us all these years? Or are you just trying to make fun of us? Dad?" The words made his eyes widen even more. "What? Dad? What are you talking about? What kind of dad?" he asked in surprise. I told him that I knew everything and there was no need to pretend. "I figured it out, and I don't need to lie. You dated my mother and then broke up with her, but she gave birth to me by you. That's why you're so partial to our family. That's why Dad hates you and Mom avoids you, right?" The neighbor stood shocked, confused, and then began to laugh. He laughed hysterically and then said I had too much imagination. Now I was confused. "Do you really think so?" "No, dear. If that were the case, I would be only too happy to have a daughter like you," he said. I didn't know what was going on. Then Uncle Matthew said something I wasn't ready for at all. "Your dad and I are brothers," he blurted out. "Brothers? Can't be." In a state of shock, I tried to digest the information and could not believe what was happening. But how and why didn't Dad say anything? It turned out that he and Dad had a fight about something a few years ago. Uncle Matthew has long forgotten about this, but Dad is still sulking. They don't look alike because my dad looks like my grandma, and my uncle looks like my grandfather. And somehow, I was also born looking like my grandfather and uncle. The neighbors didn't know this because Dad didn't want to recognize his brother because of an old conflict, so he didn't tell them that he had a brother. Well, my mother was silent because my father told her to be, and the photo was taken before I was born. "We were celebrating your parents' wedding anniversary," my uncle explained. Finally, everything fell into place. I, of course, could still not recover from the shock, but I was happy to learn that we have another relative. When my parents arrived, I told him everything and asked my father to stop sulking at his brother. He resisted for a long time, but I had a good talk with him. Uncle Matthew came to our house with a cake and gifts, after which he and my father talked for 3 hours straight about their personal lives. Now, all the rumors about my mother's infidelity have disappeared, and new ones have appeared about why the brothers did not communicate with each other. In short, I understand that neighbors' gossip is an endless thing.
Hi guys, I'm Mark. My story is about how my parents stole my childhood. Every day I lived like a prison. My parents raised me quite strictly and not quite logically, in my opinion. Just took and cut out my inner self. But as they say, there is a silver lining. My parents were careerists, so to speak. For them, the first goal was to achieve high positions at work, and they did not want to think about children. But fortunately, at the age of 40, they still decided to have a child, and it was not without their well-defined plans and schedules. Before I was born, my whole life was planned. Every detail, where I should study, what to do in my free time, what profession to choose, etc. And since childhood, I never knew what street games were, what fights were. I didn't even really have any toys, as if there was only training. In general, everything was like the army. Rise at 6, morning exercises, breakfast, morning training, and so on until the evening. Most of all, I liked when Aunt Lisa came to visit us, because at this time, my parents were distracted from me, and I could rest in peace. And my aunt secretly gave me sweets. Just so you know, my parents only gave me candy as a reward. At those times, my parents were gone and left my aunt in charge. Before leaving, they gave a clear plan of action, But my aunt did not like such methods of education and just got me a toy robot from my bag, and I played with him all day. But by the evening, my parents, seeing I had not completed any of the tasks, were very angry and began to quarrel with Aunt Lisa. After that, my mother came to me and took away my toy and gave me the paper where my daily schedule was written. I was an outcast at school. While my peers were playing, I was studying. I didn't really have any friends. One day, just walking home from school, I decided to go through the park. When I saw the playground, I couldn't help myself and stayed there to play. I did not know how much time had passed, and I returned home in the evening all dirty and stripped. My parents immediately took me to task, and they started accompanying me everywhere. This was where all the problems at school began. I became the epicenter for ridicule, and everyone began to tease me. Once we had an art day at school, and we were going with the class to the cinema for a French movie, where I went with my parents, as usual. In the hall, one of my classmates shouted, "Look who's here with his old bodyguard," and everyone started laughing. I couldn't stand it and ran away. I ran for a long time and don't remember where. I didn't notice and rushed to my aunt's house. When she saw me on the doorstep, she hugged me and offered me to stay with her. The next morning, people started knocking and shouting at the house. I realized they were my parents. No sooner had my aunt opened the door than my mother attacked her with accusations, and my father yelled at me and put me in the car and took me back home. I have already completely lost the desire to perform any tasks and rules, and I locked myself in a room and did not go out until one day my aunt came over with representatives from child protection agencies. They found out the whole situation and decided my parents were not engaged in education correctly, and they said they would take me to a boarding school and my parents had to go to a psychiatrist. This meant that I would now live separately from my parents and we would only see each other on weekends. In boarding school, life began to develop differently. I made friends with many children, and in school, you can say I had no equal. I participated in various Olympiads and easily won prizes. I even felt a kind of freedom. Over time, I began to understand why my parents wanted so much that I did not waste time on various useless things. They wished me a great future and worked hard on my upbringing. My parents gave me an excellent education. I know 4 languages, and I participate in many Olympiads. I love them very much, and I'm grateful, but thinking only about development, they completely forgot that a child should have a childhood. I can't call my childhood happy, because even though they were beautiful people, I had a lot of psychological violence in my family.